Everyone thought they knew Dean Martin, the perpetual glass of scotch in his hand, amber liquid catching the stage lights as he swayed gently to the music, the half-lidded eyes suggesting he'd enjoyed one drink too many, the slurred speech that made every punchline land softer, friendlier, like a warm blanket thrown over the audience, the teetering walk across the stage of the Copa Room at the Sand Hotel, where the most powerful people in America came to watch him pretend be drunk. But here's what they didn't know, what most people never figured out even after decades of watching him perform. The glass was usually filled with apple juice. The stumble was choreographed. The slur was an affectation, carefully calibrated disarm to make him seem harmless, approachable, human. Dean Martin's greatest performance wasn't any single song or movie. It was convincing the world that being cool required no effort at all. His son, Dean Paul Martin, confirmed it years later after the Dean Martin Show ended its remarkable run. His father couldn't have performed if he'd actually consumed the amount of alcohol everyone assumed he did. The drunk act was theater, a brilliant piece of misdirection that allowed Dean to hide in plain sight. While everyone watched the glass, they missed the man holding it. While they laughed at the tipsy crooner who seemed to barely care about anything, they overlooked the calculating artist who cared about everything. The persona he created, this laid-back Italian heartthrob who floated through life on a cloud of scotch and charm, was Dean Martin's masterpiece. It was also his prison, because once you convince the world you don't care about anything, once you perfect the art of looking effortless, people stop seeing the effort. They stop seeing the person underneath. They see what they want to see, what they paid to see, and nothing more. Born Dino Paul Crocetti on June 7, 1917, in Steubenville, Ohio, Dean Martin came from a world that had nothing to do with spotlights and champagne. His father, Gaetano Alfonso Crocetti, was an Italian immigrant who worked as a barber. His mother, Angela Crocetti, came from Italian-American stock and raised her boys in a household where Italian was the only language spoken. Young Dino didn't learn English until he started school at age 5, an experience that left him vulnerable to bullying from kids who mocked his accent and heritage. This early experience with being an outsider, of not quite fitting in, would shape everything that came after. Years later, when Dean Martin was asked why he often seemed so quiet in social situations, he explained that it stemmed from those childhood years. When Jerry Lewis and he were at the height of their fame, attending glamorous parties filled with Hollywood elite, people thought Dean was aloof or stuck-up. The truth was simpler and sadder. He kept his mouth shut because he was self-conscious about his English, about making mistakes, about revealing that underneath the smooth exterior was a kid from Steubenville who still felt like an outsider. Steubenville in the 1920s and 1930s was a steel town, a place where men worked with their hands and their backs, where the American dream meant having enough money to feed your family and maybe a little left over for a night out. It wasn't a place that produced Hollywood stars. It was a place that produced steel workers, coal miners, people who understood that life was hard, and you did what you had to do to survive. Dean understood this from an early age. He dropped out of Steubenville High School in the 10th grade, not because he was lazy or stupid, but because his family needed money, and school felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. He took whatever work he could find. He worked in the steel mills, breathing air so thick with smoke and metal dust it left a permanent taste in your mouth. He delivered bootleg liquor across state lines during Prohibition, dancing on the edge of the law because the money was better than anything a legitimate job would pay. He worked as a stock boy in a tobacco shop, biding his time, watching, learning. And he boxed under the name Kid Crochet. Dean Martin stepped into the ring and learned what it meant to take a punch, to keep getting up even when your body screamed at you to stay down, to smile and act like it didn't hurt even when your nose was broken and your ribs were cracked. He fought 36 bouts and won 25 of them, a respectable record. But more importantly, he learned that toughness wasn't about never getting hit. It was about what you did after the hit landed. Years later, when interviewers would ask him about his boxing career, Dean would joke about it with that trademark self-deprecating humor. "I won all but 11 fights," he'd say. When they asked how many he'd fought, he'd reply with a grin, "A dozen." The math didn't work, of course, but that was the point. Dean Martin understood that people didn't want the truth. They wanted the story. They wanted the myth. Behind the tobacco shop where he worked as a stock boy was an illegal casino, one of the many underground gambling operations that thrived during Prohibition and the Depression. Dean got a job there as a stickman and croupier, dealing cards and managing roulette wheels while learning the rhythms of chance, the psychology of gamblers, the way money flowed in the shadow economy. He saw how the house always won, how the game was rigged, but people played anyway because they needed to believe in the possibility of beating the odds. This education, this PhD from the School of Hard Knocks, taught Dean Martin everything he needed to know about show business before he ever set foot on a real stage. He learned that appearance mattered more than reality, that confidence could be manufactured, that if you acted like you belonged somewhere, people would believe you belonged. And most importantly, he learned that the house always wins, unless you own the house. Somewhere in all of this, working these dead-end jobs in a dying steel town, Dean started singing. Not because he thought it would make him a star, but because he liked it. Because when he sang, standing in some smoky local nightclub after his shift at the mill, people listened. They smiled. For a few minutes, they forgot about their own problems and just enjoyed the music. That feeling, that exchange of energy between performer and audience, was addictive. He called himself Dino Martini at first, borrowing the surname from Metropolitan opera tenor Nino Martini, hoping some of that classical prestige would rub off on a kid from Steubenville. He sang in a crooning style influenced by Harry Mills of the Mills Brothers and Perry Como. Smooth and easy, nothing too challenging, just pleasant sound that went down like warm honey. By late 1940, Dean had begun singing for Cleveland bandleader Sammy Watkins, who took one look at Dino Martini and suggested change. The name was too pretentious, too trying too hard. What about Dean Martin? Simple, American, easy to remember. Dean agreed. Just like that, Dino Crocetti became Dean Martin, and the kid from Steubenville started his long journey toward becoming the king of cool. But the journey was anything but easy. For years, Dean struggled to gain traction in an entertainment industry that already had plenty of crooners, plenty of handsome Italian singers, plenty of guys who could carry a tune. He worked with the Ernie Mackay Orchestra, touring and performing, making barely enough money to survive. In New York City, trying to break into the big time, he and his roommate Sonny King were so broke, they held bare-knuckle boxing matches in their apartment and charged people to watch. They'd fight until one of them was knocked out, collecting money from the spectators just to make rent. It was desperate, dangerous, and exactly the kind of thing you did when you were young and hungry and unwilling to go back to the steel mills. The turning point came in 1946 at the 500 Club in Atlantic City, New Jersey. Dean Martin was there performing his crooning act, doing his best to entertain a crowd that seemed only mildly interested. Also performing at the club was a young comedian named Jerry Lewis, a manic ball of energy who did impressions and physical comedy. They were each doing their own acts. But one night, for reasons neither of them could fully explain later, they started goofing around during each other's performances. Dean would walk on stage during Jerry's set, and they'd start ad-libbing, playing off each other. Jerry would interrupt Dean's, singing with some wild physical comedy. The audience went crazy. The owner of the club, who had been threatening to fire both of them for lackluster performances, suddenly saw dollar signs. He told them to develop a proper act together. And just like that, Martin and Lewis was born. The partnership was electric. Dean played the smooth, sophisticated straight man, while Jerry was a hyperactive, childlike clown. Dean sang romantic ballads while Jerry made faces behind him. Dean tried to be suave with the ladies while Jerry sabotaged him with pratfalls and monkey business. It was a classic comedy duo formula, but something about their chemistry elevated it beyond the ordinary. They genuinely liked each other, genuinely made each other laugh, and that authenticity came through in every performance. They became sensations almost overnight. Within a year, they were playing the biggest nightclubs in America. They got their own radio show. They started making movies. By 1948, they were among the highest paid performers in show business. At the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas in 1949, they were paid $15,000 a week, a staggering sum at the time. Jerry Lewis, never one to be cautious with money, ran up a casino debt of $137,000 in just the first week. But the casino didn't care because Martin and Lewis were packing the showroom, bringing in high rollers who lost far more than Jerry's debt at the tables. They made 16 films together between 1949 and 1956. Movies like My Friend Irma, The Stooge, The Caddy, and Artists and Models. The films weren't high art, but they were enormously popular, making millions at the box office and establishing Martin and Lewis as one of the most bankable acts in Hollywood. But success came with a price. The more famous they became, the more the cracks in the partnership began to show. Jerry was the critics' darling, the one reviewers praised for his innovative physical comedy and timing. Dean was often dismissed as merely the handsome guy who sang a few songs and let Jerry get the laughs. This might have been fine if Dean was content to be the supporting player, but he wasn't. He knew he had talent beyond being Jerry's straight man. He knew he could be a star in his own right. There were also personality conflicts. Jerry was a control freak who wanted to direct their films, to have total creative control. Dean preferred a more laid-back approach, showing up, doing the work, and going home. Jerry craved attention and validation. Dean had learned as a child to keep his head down and protect his personal space. Jerry was a neurotic bundle of insecurities who needed constant reassurance. Dean had fought in rings and worked in illegal casinos and learned to keep his emotions locked away where no one could use them against him. By 1956, the partnership had become untenable. They barely spoke to each other offstage. The performances felt forced. The joy was gone. On July 25, 1956, exactly 10 years after their first performance together, Martin and Lewis performed for the last time at the Copacabana in New York City. It was over. The industry predicted Dean Martin would disappear without Jerry Lewis. After all, Jerry was the talent, the genius, the one audiences came to see. Dean was just a singer, and there were hundreds of singers. Without Jerry to make him relevant, Dean Martin was finished. They were spectacularly wrong. Dean Martin's solo career began slowly, but it built steadily. He signed with Capitol Records and started releasing songs that showcased not just his voice, but his personality. In 1953, he recorded That's Amore, a bouncy, romantic Italian-American anthem that became his signature song. It was fun, it was charming, and it was undeniably completely Dean Martin. The song was a massive hit, reaching number 2 on the Billboard charts and establishing Dean as a legitimate solo star. He followed it up with other hits. Memories Are Made of This in 1955, which went to number 1. Everybody Loves Somebody in 1964, which knocked the Beatles' A Hard Day's Night off the top of the charts. Volare Sway. Ain't That a Kick in the Head? Song after song that defined an era that made people smile, that filled dance floors and jukeboxes across America. But Dean didn't just sing. He acted, and he was good at it. In 1958, he starred in The Young Lions alongside Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift, two of the most respected method actors of their generation. Dean held his own, delivering a performance that was subtle, nuanced, and completely free of the mugging he'd done in the Martin and Lewis comedies. Critics who had dismissed him as Jerry's sidekick were forced to reconsider. This guy could actually act. He followed it up with Some Came Running, opposite Frank Sinatra and Shirley MacLaine, Rio Bravo with John Wayne, Bells Are Ringing with Judy Holliday, and dozens of other films throughout the 1960s and 1970s. He made 51 films in his career, playing cowboys, soldiers, spies, and romantic leads. He was never going to win an Oscar. His style was too effortless, too natural for the Academy's taste, but he was a genuine movie star, someone whose name on a marquee sold tickets. And then there was Las Vegas. If there was one place that defined Dean Martin's career more than any other, it was a desert oasis where anything was possible if you had enough money and enough luck. And in the late 1950s and early 1960s, Las Vegas had the Rat Pack. The Sands Hotel opened in December 1952, built by a controversial group of investors that included Texas gambler Jake Friedman and New York nightclub boss Jack Intrater. Intrater had been the entertainment director at the famous Copacabana Club in New York, and he brought those connections with him to Vegas. He booked the biggest names in show business to perform in the Sands' legendary showroom, the Copa Room. Frank Sinatra was one of the first major stars to make the Sands his Vegas home. He performed there beginning in October 1953, typically playing 3 times a year in 2-week stints that brought in the high rollers, the oil money from Texas, the wealthy gamblers who could lose $100,000 at the tables and not blink. When Sinatra was at the Sands, the casino made a fortune. When he left, the whales left with him. Sinatra and Dean Martin had become friends while filming Some Came Running in 1958. They were casual acquaintances before the movie, but during production, something clicked. They rented a house together, threw nightly parties, and discovered they had a chemistry that went beyond the screen. Sinatra was the intense, driven perfectionist, the man who could sing a ballad that would break your heart and then call in favors from people in very dark corners. Dean was the exact opposite, laid back, funny, seemingly unbothered by anything. But somewhere in that contrast, in that push and pull between Frank's intensity and Dean's ease, they found a genuine friendship. In January 1959, Sinatra joined Dean on stage at the Sands for the first time. It was supposed to be Dean's show, but Frank showed up unannounced and they performed together, trading songs and jokes, improvising, making each other laugh. The audience went wild. This wasn't just 2 stars performing separately. This was magic. Soon, others joined. Sammy Davis Jr., the enormously talented singer, dancer, and impressionist. Joey Bishop, the comedian who served as the group's sarcastic straight man. Peter Lawford, the debonair British actor who happened to be President John F. Kennedy's brother-in-law. Together, they became known as the Rat Pack, though they prefer to call themselves the Summit or the Clan. The Rat Pack represented something new in American entertainment. They weren't just performers. They were a lifestyle brand. They epitomized a high life, expensive suits, beautiful women, endless cocktails, and the unspoken power that comes of being untouchable. When the Rat Pack was performing at the Sands, the Copa Room was the center of the universe. Senators, mob bosses, movie stars, and millionaires all crammed into space, desperate to be part of the magic. Their act was brilliant in its simplicity. Each member would perform individual numbers, showcasing their particular talent. Dean would croon a romantic ballad. Frank would deliver a swinging up-tempo number that had everyone's feet tapping. Sammy would do an explosive song and dance routine that showcased his incredible range. And in between, they would banter, telling jokes, roasting each other, drinking or pretending to drink, smoking, and generally acting like the coolest guys in the world, having the best time of their lives. The humor was adult, sophisticated, and sometimes edgy for the early 1960s. They joked about Frank's womanizing. Frank's idea of paradise is a place with a golf course and a couple of broads. They joked about Dean's drinking. I feel sorry for people who don't drink. When they wake up in the morning, that's as good as I can feel all day. They joked about Sammy's race and religion. Sammy's the only guy I know who made the cover of Jet Magazine, Time Magazine, and Feel and Stream. The jokes could be cutting, but there was an undercurrent of genuine affection. They weren't just colleagues. They were brothers. In January 1960, they took over Las Vegas to film Ocean's 11, the story of a group of World War II buddies who planned to rob 5 Las Vegas casinos simultaneously. The movie was a perfect vehicle for the Rat Pack's brand of cool. They filmed during the day and performed at the Sands at night. The performances became legendary. People flew in from across the country just to be in the Copa Room when the pack was performing. The marquee outside the Sands read Dean Martin, maybe Frank, maybe Sammy, perfectly capturing the spontaneous, anything-can-happen energy of their shows. The Rat Pack wasn't just entertaining. They were influential. They supported the civil rights movement at a time when much of the country, including much of Las Vegas, was still segregated. Sinatra and Martin refused to perform at clubs that wouldn't allow black or Jewish performers. When Sammy Davis Jr. was initially barred from staying at the hotels where he performed, Sinatra used his clout to force the issue. By 1960, the color barrier in Las Vegas had been broken, thanks in large part to the Rat Pack's insistence on equality. Dean Martin was the heart of the Rat Pack in many ways. Frank was the leader, the driving force, the one who made things happen. Sammy was the talent, the guy who could do everything. But Dean was the glue, the one who kept things light when Frank's intensity threatened to overwhelm, the one who could defuse tension with a joke or a song. Frank might have been the king, but Dean was the guy everyone wanted to hang out with. Behind the scenes, though, Dean was different than his public persona suggested. While Frank and Sammy would party until dawn, Dean would slip away, go home, have dinner with his family. While the others thrived on the constant social interaction, Dean needed solitude. His golf game became legendary not just because he was good at it, but because it gave him hours alone, away from the demands of being Dean Martin. His daughter Deanna shared a story that perfectly captured her father's character. One night, Dean's Aunt Violet arrived at a party at the Fort Steuben Hotel in his hometown of Steubenville, making a grand entrance in high heels and a strapless black taffeta gown. As she walked in, she stumbled and fell head over heels in the middle of the foyer. Everyone gasped with embarrassment as she landed in an ungainly heap on the floor. No one moved to help her. They just stared. Suddenly, Dean stepped forward, applauding enthusiastically. "Well done, Vi," he said with a huge smile. "Helping her up? That was exactly as we rehearsed it." He made everybody believe the whole thing was staged, that she performed a brilliant pratfall. Aunt Violet was so grateful for that kindness, for saving her from overwhelming embarrassment, that she never forgot it. That was the real Dean Martin. Not the drunk who didn't care about anything. Not the playboy who was just out for a good time, but a man who noticed when someone was hurting and used his charm and quick thinking to make it better. Dean Martin was married 3 times and had 8 children. Craig, Claudia, Gail, and Deanna from his first marriage to Elizabeth and MacDonald. Dean Paul Jr., Ricci, and Gina from his second marriage to Jean Beager, and his adopted daughter Sasha from his brief third marriage to Catherine Hahn. Despite his reputation as a ladies' man who spent all his time in nightclubs and casinos, the truth was more mundane. He was home every night for dinner. Jean once said, the image and reality rarely matched, but maintaining that image took a toll. In 1965, Dean launched The Dean Martin Show on NBC, a variety program that would run for 264 episodes over 9 years. The show was structured around Dean's persona as a lovable, slightly drunk host who didn't take anything too seriously. He'd stroll onto the set, seemingly half in the bag, make jokes, forget lyrics, and generally act like he'd rather be anywhere else. It looked effortless. It looked like he wasn't even trying. In reality, Dean was incredibly professional and prepared. He'd familiarize himself with all the musical arrangements while driving to the studio, listening to cassette tapes of Les Brown's orchestral accompaniments. He knew exactly what he was doing at all times. The drunk persona was carefully calculated, a character he perfected over decades. But playing that character week after week, year after year, was exhausting. Colleague Lee Hale insisted that Martin was always professional and prepared, never actually drunk during tapings. But the persona Dean had created became a cage. People expected him to be that guy all the time, the carefree drunk who didn't care about anything. When he tried to show other dimensions, when he took serious acting roles or talk about his real feelings, people didn't want to hear it. They wanted Dean Martin the character, not Dino Crocetti the person. The show was a massive success, nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a television series musical or comedy, which Dean won in 1966. It ran until 1974 and was followed by the Dean Martin Comedy Hour and the Dean Martin Celebrity Roast, the latter becoming one of the most successful TV programs in history. Dean would sit at the center of a dais while comedians and celebrities roasted other famous people, everyone getting drunk and telling raunchy jokes. It was hilarious, mean, and enormously popular. Dean hosted roasts from 1974 to 1984, skewering everyone from Bob Hope to Frank Sinatra to Muhammad Ali. By the 1980s, Dean Martin had done it all. He'd sold over 50 million records worldwide. He'd appeared in 85 film and television productions. He'd had his own national holiday. June 7th was declared Dean Martin Day in 2002, making him the only entertainer honored with his own day. He'd earned more money than anyone in the entertainment industry in 1967. He'd proven everyone wrong who said he'd fail without Jerry Lewis. He'd achieved everything he'd dreamed about as a kid in Steubenville. And then, on March 21st, 1987, everything fell apart. Dean Paul Martin Jr., Dean's eldest son with Jean, was 35 years old. Known as Dino Jr., he was something of a golden boy, handsome, talented, successful in multiple fields. He'd been a professional tennis player, good enough to compete in the Wimbledon qualifying rounds. He'd been a pop singer in the 1960s, forming the group Dino, Desi and Billy with Desi Arnaz Jr. and Billy Hinch. They'd had several minor hits. He'd been an actor, starring alongside Courtney Cox in the television series Misfits of Science. He'd been married to Olympic figure skater Dorothy Hamill. He was a semi-professional football player, a race car driver, a pre-med student. The problem with Dean Paul is that he was too good at too many things. A friend once said, he was terrific looking, from a famous family, and he had talent. When you have all those things on your plate, well, it's hard to resist someone like that. But of all his interests, fly was the one that captured Dean Paul's heart. He'd earned his pilot's license at 16. In 1980, he joined the California Air National Guard. He went through officer training with the Air Force, was commissioned as a second lieutenant in 1981, and eventually flew F-4 Phantom fighter jets with the 196th Tactical Fighter Squadron, 163rd Tactical Fighter Group, out of March Air Force Base in California. His father was proud. "I'm proud of him," Dean said. "I'd be proud even if he didn't become a jet pilot, because he's a good boy. He just doesn't know what he wants to be." On the morning of March 21st, 1987, Captain Dean Paul Martin and his weapons systems officer, Captain Ramon Ortiz, took off from March Air Force Base for a routine training mission. They were flying an F-4C Phantom II, accompanied by two other aircraft from their squadron. The mission was straightforward: simulate bombing runs over the San Bernardino Mountains. But a snowstorm moved in quickly, reducing visibility to near zero. The three aircraft were told to change course to avoid the massive peak of San Gorgonio Mountain. Somewhere in the confusion, in the blinding white of the storm, Dean Paul's aircraft turned at low altitude. 9 minutes into the flight, radar contact was lost. The F-4 Phantom, traveling at approximately 400 to 560 miles per hour, flew inverted into a solid granite wall between two mountain peaks. Both men died instantly. Dean Paul Martin Jr. was 35 years old. Captain Ortiz was 39. It took 4 days for Air Force search and rescue teams to locate the crash site in the eastern area of Wood Canyon, Riverside County, on the slopes of San Gorgonio Mountain. The wreckage was scattered across the mountainside. The bodies were recovered and returned to their families. Dean Martin's world ended that day too, though it took 8 more years for his body to catch up with his soul. The funeral was held at Los Angeles National Cemetery in West Los Angeles. More than 200 people attended, including Jerry Lewis, Frank Sinatra, Sammy Davis Jr., Lucille Ball, Bob Newhart, Desi Arnaz Jr., Milton Berle, and Henry Mancini. Fighter jets flew overhead in a traditional military tribute. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking service. Security guard prevented the press from accessing the ceremony, but everyone who was there remembered Dean Martin standing at his son's grave, a broken man. Singer Paul Anka, who attended the funeral, said the death of Dean Paul was a huge turning point for Dean. After that event in his life, things really changed. Author William Keck, who was a reporter for the National Enquirer during Dean's final years, witnessed the transformation firsthand. He'd often see Dean at a local restaurant, sitting alone, always wearing the same outfit, navy blue pants and a light blue shirt. He was still the nice man that he seemed to be on television, Keck recalled. He would always greet me when I came over to his table. He would always say, "I'll be back on that stage one day. You'll see me," but he was done. Dean had been scheduled to embark on a reunion tour with Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. in 1988, a tour that was being billed as Together Again. It was supposed to be a triumphant return, a chance for the surviving members of the Rat Pack to recreate their magic one more time. But after just a few performances, Dean walked away. He claimed it was due to kidney problems, and while that was partially true, everyone close to him knew the real reason. He didn't have it in him anymore. The light had gone out. Liza Minnelli replaced Dean for the remainder of the tour, which was renamed the Ultimate Event. Frank and Sammy carried on, but it wasn't the same. Dean Martin's absence was felt in every performance. Dean spent his final years in solitude, retreating from the public eye. He'd been a heavy smoker his entire life, and in September 1993, he was diagnosed with lung cancer at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Doctors told him surgery could prolong his life, but Dean refused. He was 76 years old, his son was dead, and he was tired. So tired, he made his last public appearance in 1990. By 1995, he rarely left his Beverly Hills home. His health deteriorated rapidly. Kidney disease, heart problems, and emphysema from decades of smoking all conspired to shut his body down piece by piece. On Christmas morning, December 25th, 1995, Dean Martin died of acute respiratory failure at his home in Beverly Hills. He was 78 years old. When the news broke, Las Vegas dimmed the lights on the Strip in his honor. It was a tribute reserved for only the biggest stars, and Dean Martin certainly qualified. He'd helped build Las Vegas into the entertainment capital of the world. He'd made the Sands Hotel legendary. He'd shown the world what cool looked like. Frank Sinatra did not attend Dean's funeral. By 1995, Sinatra was 79 years old and dealing with his own health issues. Those close to him said he was too overwrought to attend, too devastated by the loss of his closest friend. Instead, Sinatra's wife Barbara and daughter Nancy represented him at the service. But Sinatra did release a statement. Dean was my brother, not through blood but through choice. Good times and bad, we were there together. At the funeral, Rosemary Clooney, George Clooney's aunt and a close friend of Dean's, sang, "Everybody loves somebody," Dean's signature hit that had knocked the Beatles off the top of the charts in 1964. As her voice filled the chapel, as the words hung in the air, those gathered must have remembered Dean in his prime. Smooth, confident, effortless. The king of cool, making it all look easy. Dean Martin's body was interred at the Westwood Village Memorial Park Cemetery in Los Angeles. The crypt features the epitaph, "Everybody loves somebody sometime," a perfect summary of a man who'd spent his life making other people happy, even as he struggled to find happiness himself. In 1996, Ohio Route 7 through Steubenville was rededicated as Dean Martin Boulevard. Road signs bearing an Al Hirschfeld caricature Dean's likeness marked the stretch, with historical markers providing brief biographies. It was a hometown's way of saying thank you to the kid who'd made it big, who'd proven you didn't have to stay in the steel mills forever, who'd shown that a boy named Dino Crocetti could become Dean Martin and conquer the world. So what's the legacy of Dean Martin? What do we take away from the life of a man who seemed to have everything but found it wasn't enough? First, we learned that coolness isn't about not caring. Dean Martin cared deeply about his craft, his family, his friends. But he had the wisdom to not let that caring turn into anxiety or desperation. He'd learned in the boxing ring that you take the punch, you get back up, and you don't let them see it hurt. That's not indifference. That's resilience. Second, we learned that the persona we present to the world is rarely the full story. Dean Martin, the drunk, was a character. Dino Crocetti, the man, was something else entirely. A professional, a devoted father, a loyal friend, a guy who saved his Aunt Violet from embarrassment with quick thinking and kindness. We all wear masks to some degree. The question is whether we remember where the mask ends and we begin. Third, we learn that talent alone isn't enough. Dean Martin was immensely talented, but so were thousands of other singers and actors who never made it. What set Dean apart was his understanding of image, of branding before branding was a thing. He knew what people wanted to see, and he gave it to them. He made the act look effortless precisely because he worked so hard at making it look effortless. Fourth, we learned that grief is not something you get over. You just learn to carry it. Dean Martin never recovered from his son's death. He spent the last 8 years of his life going through the motions, waiting for it to be over. Some losses are too profound to move past. All you can do is endure. And finally, we learned that being cool doesn't mean being heartless. The story of Dean helping the waitress, whether it happened exactly as told or not, captures something essential about the man. He noticed people. He cared about people. He used his power to defend people who had no power of their own. That's the kind of coolness that matters, the kind that lasts beyond the songs and the movies and the awards. Dean Martin was born into poverty in an immigrant family in a dying steel town. He worked in mills and illegal casinos. He boxed. He delivered bootleg liquor. He sang in dingy nightclubs for audiences that barely paid attention. And somehow, through talent and determination, and that ineffable quality we call charisma, he became the king of cool. He made billions of dollars. He made classic films. He made millions of people laugh and sing along. But in the end, none of it was enough to save him from the one thing money and fame can't fix: the unbearable weight of losing a child. Dean Martin spent his final years alone, waiting to join his son. When he died on Christmas Day 1995, part of America died with him. The age of the Rat Pack, of the Copa Room at the Sands, of effortless cool and smooth crooning. All of it ended with Dean. What remains is the music. That's Amore still plays at Italian weddings. Everybody Loves Somebody still makes people smile. Ain't That a Kick in the Head still gets covered by contemporary artists. His films still play on television, introducing new generations to the smooth charm of Dean Martin. And somewhere in there, if you listen closely enough, if you watch carefully enough, you can see past the character to the man underneath. The kid from Steubenville who made it big. The father who never recovered from losing his son. The friend who was always there when you needed him. The performer who made it all look easy even when it wasn't. Dean Martin once said, "I'd hate to be a teetotaler. Imagine getting up in the morning and knowing that's as good as you're going to feel all day." It was a joke, of course, part of the drunk act. But maybe there was a truth hidden in there too. Maybe Dean understood that life is hard, that pain is inevitable, and the best we can do is find moments of joy wherever we can. A good song, a good friend, a beautiful sunset, a glass of something that makes the edges softer. That was Dean Martin's gift to us. Not the illusion of coolness, but the reminder that life is meant to be lived, not endured. That laughter is medicine. That kindness matters. That sometimes the best thing you could do is sing a song that makes people forget their troubles, even if just for 3 minutes. If you've made it this far, if you've stayed with us through this journey into the life of Dean Martin, I want you to know something. You matter. Your story matters. Your struggles and triumphs, your moment of coolness and your moments of vulnerability. All of it matters. Dean Martin would have understood that. He would have lifted you up when you were down. He would have made you laugh when you want to cry. He would have reminded you that we're all just doing our best with what we've got. So here's what I want you to do. Hit that subscribe button. Join us as we continue to explore the real stories behind Hollywood's biggest legends. Because there's always more to the story than what you see on screen. There's always a human being behind the persona, struggling and striving and trying to make sense of it all. Drop a comment below and tell me, what's your favorite Dean Martin song? What moment in his career means the most to you? Let's keep the conversation going. Let's keep the memory alive. And remember, Pallies, the coolest thing you can be is kind. Dean Martin knew it. Now you know it too. Until next time, keep swinging.